Max Verstappen says the Red Bull RB20 felt better to drive at the start of the season, but is confident that modifications will address current concerns. Red Bull's absolute supremacy in Formula One came to an end in the second quarter of 2024, with the Dutch driver winning just 3 of the remaining 6 races, while Mercedes, McLaren and Ferrari stepped forward to challenge. After starting the season in the same unbeatable way that Red Bull enjoyed throughout 2023, the progress achieved by the team's opponents has overshadowed Red Bull's own upgrades, with the RB20 slipping back into the pack as the season continued. Verstappen slid to 6th place at the British Grand Prix due to pure pace in the first half of the race, while the McLarens and Mercedes excelled in the changing conditions. But a nailed-on tyre strategy brought Verstappen back into contention for victory in the closing stages. Hints from recent races imply that the McLaren MCL38 may be F1's outright quickest car, with Mercedes and Red Bull also capable of competing for that honour depending on the racetrack. Red Bull has unveiled a significant upgrade package for the Hungarian Grand Prix, a track that has some of the qualities that the RB20 hasn't had so far this season. Slower speed, tighter radius corners with a necessity for assaulting the curbs at some. The modifications include a new engine cover and reshaped side pods, as well as alterations to the rear corner wheel bodywork, a new profile front wing, and reworked front lower wishbone front leg shrouds. It's a vital package aimed at restoring Red Bull's competitiveness, and in an interview with the media on Thursday, Max Verstappen discussed his previous experiences with the car. "I think it's just the way we set up the car. Maybe also what we get back from the simulator. All these kinds of things need to be probably a bit better," he said, when asked about how things had changed through the second quarter of the season. "Plus, we just need more performance because naturally, if you have a car that has better performance, it becomes a better car to drive as well because you don't need to push it over or close to the limit. If you look at it realistically, other teams have made bigger steps. That's very clear. But I know that my team is pushing as hard as they can to find performance. It's just very complicated, these cars. Some bits might be also just in the setup itself, but at the same time, we need to find more performance. As the leading team, we have less time in the wind tunnel and stuff. I'm not using that as an excuse, because I don't want to think like that. But the reality is that we have less time. We try to do the best we can." Verstappen was referring to the aerodynamic testing restrictions sliding scale, which changes every 6 months. The leading team is given the fewest hours to work in the wind tunnel and carry out CFD modelling for new components, with available hours increasing for teams lower down the Constructors' Championship order. Given that Red Bull began the season in a similarly dominant manner as last year, does Verstappen believe the gap is decreasing due to his team's mistakes, or that the other teams have simply unlocked more performance from their respective machines? "I think it's 2 things, because at the beginning of the year I felt actually really good with the car. Probably even more natural than the year before for me to drive the car, which was a positive thing," he said. "But then, let's say after a few races with the competition closing up the car, we just had weekends which were a bit messy and a bit difficult to find the sweet spot, where in the first few races we didn't really have a lot of issues, and everything just seemed to click a bit more naturally. Other teams have shown that you can make big chunks, naturally in the past, when you're the leading team and you're doing very well. I think it's quite normal to make smaller steps. But now it's up to us again to try and find more performance, and that's what we try to do." Asked whether this has led to more risk-taking on the setup side of things, Verstappen said being pushed harder overall as a team leads to greater jeopardy. "We've always been trying to optimize things, and if your car is not the dominant force anymore, you have to try and, I wouldn't say overdrive it, but you have to try and be more on the limit," he said. "Then of course it's easier to have little moments, or it's all a bit more peaky, a bit easier to have difficulties, I would say. But now it's up to us to try and make it a bit easier for ourselves by bringing upgrades, and hopefully the car performs a bit better." Following the altercation between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, the Austrian Grand Prix became the latest race to have its stewarding called into question. Norris was given a 5-second penalty for exceeding track limits after repeated warnings, but many thought his final strike was unfair, considering he gave up the position to Verstappen after gaining an advantage off the circuit. Part-time stewards have not previously given fines for such events, but they did at the Red Bull Ring, and team management and drivers want to improve consistency in that area of Formula One. At the British Grand Prix, Brown stated that he has had very healthy conversations with the FIA regarding potential changes to how races are managed in the future. I think the FIA recognise part-time, underfunded stewarding is not how you govern a full-time, very intense, very technical, very big racing series. So the conversation's been very healthy. I don't think we're set up for success with the current system, continued the American. I think it's important. It's not a reflection on the individuals that are stewarding, but to just show up and do this part-time as a favour isn't what we need, and I think there'll be changes to address it, to raise the professionalism and the investment in stewarding, which I think everybody universally welcomes. I think the drivers know best, and I know they had a long meeting yesterday. I think the drivers need to have greater input to what they think the driving standard rules should be. At the end of the day, they're the ones driving. So if they can all get aligned and agree on what that is, then that seems like a great basis from which to start from, and then the stewards need to consistently govern against whatever they all agree to. But wrong decisions weren't the only thing Zak Brown was upset about. He also stated that Formula One teams should have a smaller role in voting on the implementation of FIA regulations, claiming that team principal meetings can be pretty embarrassing because everyone votes for rules that benefit their teams in the short term. I believe the FIA is currently making a mess behind the scenes. The McLaren CEO has said that he would want teams to have less authority with Formula One and the FIA making final decisions and enforcing regulations to create a more equitable and better sport. Zak Brown voiced concern that giving F1 team principals too much power in developing and enforcing regulations leads to contradicting conclusions during embarrassing team principal meetings. It does make you wonder, how did we go racing without any of this stuff for as long as we did and not have any of these controversies? I think the teams collectively are pretty guilty of creating a lot of these issues themselves by overcomplicating what we want in race cars, what we want on regulations, Brown continued, because something will happen, and we'll all spend an inordinate amount of time getting into so much detail, and we don't necessarily think about the unintended consequences. So that comes back to my view, which I think I've been consistent on. I'd like to see the teams have less authority, as much of a voice through voting, for all these different things that we vote on. We're all conflicted in some way at some point, and the threshold for teams to be able to rally together to block something that is not in there. I think we do need to give more of the power back to Formula One and the FIA to do what's right for the sport. I think we're our own worst problem. Which one of the two teams you think will score better in the next race in Hungary? Will Red Bull have an astonishing comeback, with Max Verstappen winning one more race this year? Or will McLaren get a win with one of their drivers? Let us know in the comments down below.